Lowell Robinson, thank you for joining me on Lingofest. I've been looking forward to this conversation. Um, you're a very interesting person. And let me start with this so that folks know how interesting you are. You have a BA in political science from Tulane, then you have a master's in fine arts from the Art Institute of Chicago, and then a mass media institute summer program in Stanford, and now you are a senior producer, voice and AI at KQED in San Francisco. So, walk us through this journey. How did you start from political science and up where you are, which is about technology and really exciting things? Not that political science is not exciting, but how did you get that, especially these times?
That's right. That's right. Political science is exciting. I think that it's really hard when you start in school, and I think it's really good to sort of follow your passions, things that you're interested in, and when you're going all the way back to undergraduate, that's a really long time for myself.
Same
And
here.
yeah, and the truth is that the technologies that I'm involved with today um, definitely did not exist,
Hmm.
at least in a mainstream way, maybe in a theoretical way. And so, what happens when you find yourself in a job that didn't even exist? When people were asking you younger, well, what do you want to do? Like, and you're just like, I'm going to do the job that isn't invented yet. It's possible, and
Yeah.
that's kind of what happened to me. And what I recognized with a lot of what I was doing in school was in I was really interested in storytelling, um, and so my whether it was documentaries or actually in graduate school is where I really started getting into more multimedia work and computer programming and sort of mixing mediums together. And it really came to storytelling, and technology was the sort of the glue that held it together. Um, I I studied film at a time when film was sort of changing to more to digital,
Hmm.
and of course now we were in constant flux and change. And so my new role is also a brand new role at KQED as a senior producer of voice and AI. That role didn't exist before, and now it does. And so I'm interested in how we sort of create these new spaces, but there's parts of what we bring to it that are consistent. So that the technologies might be
Hmm.
new, but the ways of how we interact or communicate, like we build on that, and so we build on the past, even if the new technology is there.
Wonderful. And so the role that you have, it's a pretty unique role. Like you guys are pushing the envelope at KQED. Do you know anyone who sort of has a formal role like yours, who's trying to figure out how this new emerging medium of voice and conversational voice uh, can be can be a tool to deliver stories and content and so forth?
I mean, I would not say that I'm completely alone here. There is definitely in public media. Public media always pushes is able to sort of push on media in ways that maybe commercial enterprises don't. And
Yeah.
so, like, there
Mm.
are other public media stations that also experiment with voice and voice activation and skills and ways of bringing uh, media to listeners and interacting. Um, I think every public media is also unique in that every station or every community is somewhat, we are unique in that way. And so it's sort of like how can you make something work for your local audience
Hmm.
is not that like it's like this is the way to do it.
Hmm.
So being in the Bay Area is of course very technologically focused, and so I think areas that
Hmm.
have that and connect in that way, there might be definitely a different approach that you would take. But I do talk to producers from other media stations. And while we don't do the exact same thing, we are definitely exploring the future.
Wonderful. So let's dig a little bit deeper into exactly the kinds of things that you are trying to do with your program. with your project, let's say. Um, Give us some examples that people can sort of visualize or feel. Like what kind of things, like skills and so forth.
Well, I mean, I think that in a lot of ways, skills are probably the most tangible way
Mm-hmm.
where you can say, oh, here's the skill or this action, and I can enable it, and it has
Mm-hmm.
rules around it, and I can work with it. But it's probably a lot broader than that, because really we think about new ways that we now consume media, and a lot of that just, it's pretty invisible to us. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
most people don't even think about like over the air broadcast waves. Like, why is it that I can turn on my radio and all of a sudden there's a broadcast there that I can tune into? And I think digital has similar things, like how does the internet work? How does this connection happen? And so right now, what we focus a lot on is making sure that our content is available in multiple channels. And when we look at, let's say, like a voice enabled skill, the voice part does seem interesting that way, but the digital broadcast of the content and how can you get that content is probably the part that we focused on more than necessarily the voice interaction. I think about the voice interaction because I think that's really interesting, but ultimately we live in a space right now where a lot of the media that we that we consume, um, the playlist might be algorithmically adjusted, right? So that, why is this being suggested for me? Why is this coming after something that I just heard? And I think that a lot of there's a lot of interest in trying to understand how much of that is personalized, how much of that is unique to the broadcaster that's sort of doing it, how much of that is adjusted by larger platforms that put out these continuous listening experiences. And as you see different platforms partner together, what does that mean, right? So what does that mean to consume news on Spotify? And how is that different than consuming news on Google or Alexa, um, or Audible? So a lot of it is trying to think about those different spaces and how your organization um, can really, where are the parts that where are the parts that what you're already good at, and where do you have to change in order to be better as new landscapes emerge.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so the overused dictum of the media, the content is, what is it? The medium is the, oh, McLuhan, right? Marshall McLuhan. Um, the medium is the message. The medium. I don't know why I blanked on it. Right. I think this one here is clearly what you're doing with all these conversational interfaces is going to create perhaps new content, new messages that you couldn't convey in other ways through the sort of the serial storytelling that we are used to, where a reporter sort of has this overarching view of the world, and they tell you how things are, and maybe they bring people who talk and provide more context, and flavor and color and all that. Um, and so, radio being linear, forces you to tell a story linearly, right? Text is different, so you can jump around and so on. And with hyperlinking, you have a new way of telling stories. And so, what kind of new stories, if you've been able to sort of gel something up to be able to describe it, what kind of new stories you think you can tell with this new amalgam of technology that you're playing with?
Well, I'll just take one step back before
Sure.
just jump. Some of the things that we're experimenting with is that the way that we consume media. I mean, I think that one of the I do still listen to radio, and
Yeah.
and but it's not the only format that I listen to. And I think that there are many people that listen to radio, but they also listen to podcasts. So
Yeah.
podcasts already sort of changes
Mhm.
this paradigm that you're describing, which is that this isn't a broadcast model. This is like, I'm subscribing to this. I'm downloading this episode. I can move through this episode. I can pause this episode. So a lot of what when we're talking about audio that is digestible in different forms, we already have a lot of different models that
Yeah.
exist
Mhm.
that we see. And what you're really looking at is that when we listen to a podcast, they're not all the same length. They're not all the same format. There is a lot of experimentation in that way, and different people
Mhm.
connect to different ideas. So I think a lot of times what you are trying to say, like the content that you are trying to convey, is it the right match for the technology, right? For what for happening. So if we were to think about listening to something with a smart device and the
Mhm.
idea of, let's say, I can skip. Like, I don't. I think that
Mhm.
does that make sense for longer form content? Probably not as much, right? Longer form content is probably something where there's some other type of form of discoverability. You find it, you listen to it, you settle into it. It's not a matter of just skipping through. That's just a off the cuff remark. I haven't done any research on
Mhm.
that, but a shorter part, let's say you're updating, right? So if you think about like the earlier, probably one of the earliest things that Amazon did with flash briefing was giving people the ability to come up with custom playlists, to be able to subscribe to different briefings,
Mhm.
and all of a sudden maybe that's the briefing they want to hear, they maybe it isn't, and they skip and short, and they sort of move through. So then that is a different type of
Yeah.
interactivity that didn't exist before. Does that change the content that people make? Do people have to communicate what this is right at the beginning or establishes? Most likely,
Yeah.
but that's probably not that's not so different from other things that we experiment with,
Yeah.
right? I
Yeah.
mean, we hear things that also fit into that. Um,
Yeah.
what With audio, it's a little bit more challenging. To there's What I'm saying is that if you have like a multimodal design and you're seeing like a headline, at least you have that context right at the beginning, and you're like, I know it's going to be about this eventually.
Mhm.
But if you're only hearing it in a audio first experience, there's nothing visual. Like people that are veteran at audio broadcast really know how to convey what you're about to hear right away, and you
Mhm.
know that. So that part is not new at all to the medium.
Mhm.
That's one of the reasons that I think that audio broadcasters are so great at this medium, is that they've been doing it for many, many years. They are great at audio storytelling.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so let's look at like one new functionality, and we can brainstorm together that sort of gives one a different experience, or an experience that didn't exist before, which is, for example, search, right?
Mm.
So you launch the speaker and you're listening, and you say, "Oh, give me something that talks about this, this, and that," and goes and does its best and finds you something that sort of fits your search criteria. So that's a new experience, right? And as you were talking there, it occurred to me that, okay, so you've asked for something. How are we going to package that back to you so that you can consume it um, in a way that is in a way that is pleasant to you, right? So we'll probably need techniques from audio folks, people who know how to present audio, um, to say, okay, here's what I found for you. Also, how to slice the audio, perhaps. How far do you go into that thing? Um, just you live in that world right now where you talk to people who create audio, and you're thinking about audio. This particular use case of searching, for example, how would that? Again, we're just brainstorming. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's a that's a really challenging brainstorm. I think that part of with search, the it has a lot to do with the like what content are you what content are you searching for, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the things I think that's really hard for, say, Google, when you're asking your Google device and you're saying like, hey, I'm looking for this, it doesn't really know if are you looking for a song, a restaurant, like a recipe. A lot of things like we use the context around it, the words, it really sounds the same, right? Like that there is a restaurant called Butterfly, or I really am asking about butterflies. I think that one of the advantages of any sort of media broadcast is they've thought about like the domains, like the content that they are trying to categorize, and setting you up for success by saying like, oh, you are searching inside of this show, you are looking for this podcast, you are looking for this broadcast. And I think that you see that with skills and actions where people have tried to come up with more specialized domains to allow you to have that. The fluidity of vocal search is incredible, but you really want to be in the right space, right? So like it would be the same as like going to like a car dealership and asking for a sandwich, and they'd be like, I don't have that. And so these devices, which can be anything, you still have to be able to put yourself in the right space of what are you looking for right now. And I think the larger platforms, because we're so used to being able to search for everything, have put themselves in a really challenging spot of making that make sense. But I think like a media broadcaster is in a better spot to be able to guide you through, hey, are you looking for this or this? In that way.
No, that's great. That's a great point. And I think the notion that you can ask something of something else without context, it just doesn't exist in the real world, right? Meaning when I'm talking to, when I pick up the phone, I call the bank, right? Okay, I assume the role of a customer of the bank, and so within that role, there are only certain things that I can ask. And same thing with the bank, the person, right? They have a role, and so maybe there's pleasantries at the beginning, but it's very. So when I say what's my balance, right? Okay, there's no ambiguity there, or am I good? Is everything good? Well, everything good with my account, right? So the framing is
yes. Except I think that you, Ahmed, ask really hard questions, and I think you're really interested in a lot of things in the world. So I imagine that you probably challenge people when you're out there. I don't know. I've never gone shopping with you, but my guess is that there's a few people where you really throw them for a loop.
Well, I ask questions. That's what I do. But no, the point is that you're making is great. It's an important point, and I think it just continues to elude folks who are designing these skills in action, which is, okay, people come to these skills or actions or conversations. They should come in with expectations about what this thing is going to do for them and what they can ask and so forth, right? So you have to put on a hat before you go into the skill, and then you have to announce yourself. I have to announce yourself outside of the skill. One of my biggest beefs is the UX designer and the voice UX designer, the voice experience designer, taking a lot more than what they should take on, which is they are not there to tell you what they can do, what it can do, what the skill can do. Discovery should not happen with the skill. The skill shouldn't say I can do X, Y, and Z for you. It's already a lost cause if it's doing that. The person who comes in should know, oh, this thing is going to help me with, understanding with the city of San Francisco. It's going to tell me all about city of San Francisco. That's what it does. And so I can ask it, but that's what it does, right? And so it doesn't tell me. I can tell you about the city of San Francisco. I already know what it does from the get-go. So I think that a lot of work should be done around the skill, like marketing it, training people about what it does, so that when you go in there, you're not going to get into frustration that isn't necessary. And so go back to the framing, right? If I'm searching within, go ahead.
I just want to say that what you're describing in terms of the marketing of the skill, I do think that in many ways right now, I think Adam Chire described voice as an expert interface. The idea that most people don't know what you can do, and it's kind of I think probably for a lot of designers, it's exciting to try everything,
Yeah.
and put that all out there. And in many ways, like it's sort of this, what you see is a very simple approach, right? Like for as much of the interactivity or experiments that I can describe to you, most people, what they do for listening
Yeah.
is saying
Yeah.
play KQED. You
Right.
go to your smart device right now and say play KQED, it works.
Yeah.
Like it'll work for you where you are, and it'll work for me here. That's incredible.
Yeah.
So if I was to say I wanted to have these deeper levels, you could either think of that as like, hey, that's an expert level to be able to get to that.
Hmm.
Um, and if I was going to try to show you all of the expert levels right at the beginning, right as you were being onboarded to this experience, you could feel pretty overwhelmed.
Yep.
So that part of how do you stage, how do you allow people to sort of grow or evolve with this
Yeah.
new format? But that's not unique to skills. I think that's unique to this medium. We still don't know exactly how much we want to interact with our voice, even though I think in your use case, search is a beautiful use case because we're used to asking like, where is something, or what is this,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
questions.
Yeah. And again, it's just, I don't know if it's a thing that people want to do or not, but I was just using it as an example. Let's say I want, I listened to a podcast, let's say 3 days ago, and somewhere in the podcast, somebody said a joke, right? And that was a good joke. And so, and
Okay.
so, and so I don't remember exactly the joke, but it was a good joke. So I want to say, tell me where, where Joe says that joke, right? Kind of a question, right? But again, it's we have to, we have to find out what kind of what kind of things. If we're focusing on the use case of somebody who has listened to a podcast, again, as close as focused as possible is the path to excellence, right? So that's the use case. Somebody who listened to a podcast and goes back to podcasts that they listen to and they ask questions. What kind of questions do they ask? Would be the user experience research that needs to be done. So they might ask about humor. They might ask about specific things that they talked about. That was that section where he talked about this. I want to hear that again because again, voice. It's not like you can see it and you can zoom. You can see the image and you can pause here. You have to ask for it by speaking. So as you can see, it's already exploding into all kinds of things. This thing that we are brainstorming over, this search thing.
I think that there is certainly, there's a lot of things that are explored at the beginning are very utilitarian, right? So
Hmm.
it's less of like, what could we do in this new space, as much as like, what's my need right now?
Hmm.
And I think that if my need is like, hey, we see play as one of those things, like I need this to play, and I don't need to run over there and touch the button every time. I'm just going to tell it to play, and then we know that
Yeah.
pause would be the other part.
Yeah.
I think that next step that you're sort of describing, which is like, hey, after I pause and I want to search for something else, or I want to dig in deeper or find that joke, that's true for some people. It's probably not the lowest common denominator,
Yeah.
right, in terms
Yeah.
of what these parts, and I think that is an interesting space to see what evolves that way.
Yeah. It's going to take
What
time. Yeah.
but one of the challenges I think is that as devices are, because they feel so personal to us and because they sound um, very conversational, there is this part where I feel like I could ask anything, right?
Mm.
Like I really do feel like I'm a Star Trek Enterprise, where I'm like, I should be able to say something like, "What are you made of? What's happening in the world right now?
Hmm.
What are these parts?" So there's this challenge where there's this focus on this sort of simple utilitarian connection at the same time as like you see like this big vast horizon of like, wow, I really could ask anything at this moment, and I want it to understand me, and I want to be able to like really be heard and understood and drill down into this idea, like, because maybe if you heard that joke, the next part would be like, no, 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 I want you to listen to me and tell me, why am I not good at telling this joke? How could I change my delivery? Right? Like, you're like, why stop at just hearing the joke? Let's go to the
Hmm.
next part. So
Yeah. Yeah. No, I hear you. I hear you. Well, that the thing is that dangerous territory, right? When people start thinking that the thing can do a lot of things for them, because it sets them up for disappointment, because it's not going to do the things that they may. But it's fun to explore. And I think one thing is this thing, as you said, is evolving, right? So we're just starting to get comfortable with it, and we get comfortable with it because it can do certain things as simple as they may be well, and it gives value to our life. Meaning, I can just ask the speaker, and it plays it. That's great, right? I don't have to, to do that extra thing, and it becomes part of my. And now it's a reliable thing. Oh, now it can do. And that's one of the strategies that Amazon, when they launched, which was very smart actually, is they launched it with just 2 or 3 features way back 2014, right? And so and it did those very well. And I think it was like music and time and weather, and I think you could ask questions. That was it, right? And even the questions you could ask, it was were limited, but what it could do well. And it was, the framing was good. Hey, this is a baby. He doesn't know much, right? And so people, were positioned to get comfortable with it. And I think overall, as a whole, medium, I think what you're saying is right. Like, what is the common denominator? Let's do that well, so that there's confidence, that is built for the interface. The question then becomes, this is where the people who push the envelope become useful, right? These people they're asking for this, right? And they may ask for things like, how old are you and all that to the device, but then they might say, I wonder if it could find, stuff for me, or if it could whatever, right? And that's just discovery. That's discovery from the folks who are researching this thing. What's the next increment that we can tackle safely is the thing. Yeah.
So I think for us, I mean, there are parts that we definitely push on experiments that are never meant for the public to use or understand, that really tried to push the envelope. But I think even with these smaller steps, like say search, the reason I was sort of talking about like limited domain is that, like, to be able to search an entire catalog of work is challenging, right? And to be able to, and that part when you're saying like, how would that be parsed back to you? How much are you going to get to hear of something? How many choices can I keep in my mind? But with a more limited more limited domain, for instance, one of the things that but also public media, we produce like a voter guide for elections, and one of the things that's really challenging is that the California propositions, there's quite a few that are put out. So these are propositions. They're added to the ballot. There's a lot of questions that you can ask about these propositions. They're numbered, and even though they're numbered, you oftentimes remember a proposition by like what it's about, not necessarily the number. And when if you're looking at scanning a sheet of paper, it's easy to find that. You can say, oh, that's Prop 22. So one of the ways that we brought vocal search into this proposition guide was allowing you to use natural language to describe the proposition in order to find it that way. So maybe you knew the number, or maybe you knew this is the one that's talking about teens voting or property taxes. And then at that point, you then also had another limited set of questions that you could ask, which is like, who supports this? Who supports this proposition? Who's against this? And those are the questions that we expect to see in a voter guide. It is nice, one, to be able to just say it. Also to be able to hear the reporters that are reporting on it, like in their own voice, to hear the right, to be able to hear the right amount of information that you can feel informed, and then decide, do I want to go deeper? And how much more do I need to go? So I think that like search for more limited experiences like that, we can definitely make happen. But I still don't think it's for everybody, because I think that for many people, when you're doing a voter guide, it really is about reading something in front of you and then having a conversation at the table. But I do think that one of the places that like voice could go would be to have that conversation with your device, to be able to better understand where you stand on a position by it interviewing you or asking questions, not in a loaded way, but in a way for you to be able to explore your own thought. But I don't think that could expand to everything. I think, again, you need these kind of limited domains to be able to do that. And the fact that it is limited brings back that other point that you meant about discoverability, which is like, how would I know that this even exists, that I could
Yeah.
find it?
Or what to ask. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, my thinking is innovation happens when there are constraints. You know, when you have a lot of constraints, that's when you innovate and when you create new things. I think because you have to, you have to focus on the goal, right? What is the goal, and what can I do to get to that goal with these 5 or 6 things that I can do, right? And so, for example, I think the fact that voice is constraining in that it's linear and it's temporal and it's ephemeral and you have to remember, right, stuff and so forth. Then I think the skills that are successful are the ones that are quick and don't require to remember anything, and where it's just 1 or 2 things that you can do with it and that's it, and people love those skills, and I understand why, because there's a fit between what it's trying to do and the medium itself, right? So asking for the weather, there's no other better way than just to ask, or the time, or set an alarm. There's no way anything can beat setting an alarm by just saying it, right? I mean, the iPhone here is it. I used to like admire how I could set up an alarm so quickly with the iPhone before the Echo came out, and now there's no way I'm gonna spend like a minute doing an alarm, right? So there are certain things. I mean, that's one of the things that people I don't think understand is it's voice only is not sort of like an inferior interface. It depends on the use case, right? It is the most powerful interface for certain use cases where you don't want to use your eyes or hands, or by just saying something happens. Okay, well, that's the best thing in the world. It's when you're able to just utter something and it happens, right? And so so there was something that you said at the very beginning, and I took notes here, and I want to go back to it, which I thought was very interesting, which has to do with public radio, doing things, public radio and public TV, doing things and pushing the envelope and playing and innovating in ways that you know, private channels and private radio stations and all that can't really do or don't do. And that's interesting because
I mean, I wouldn't
that.
say that I wouldn't say that they can't or that they don't. I'm just saying that it is ingrained in the history of public media.
Yeah, I mean, isn't it interesting? I'm sure people have thought and written about it, that a lot of quality comes from public radio, right? And a lot of junk comes from private, radio. I know you don't want to take sides, but I'll take sides. I think there's just a lot of junk in private, in moneyed, institutions that need to make profit and so on and so forth. Whereas quality, for some reason, comes from PBS and from NPR. So maybe you can explain to me at least, like, how come how come I see a lot of quality in NPR, and how come I can't find it in Sirius Radio? To be honest with you, right? Finnish radio is entertainment and all that kind of stuff and all, and the more outrageous you are, the better. But if I want sanity and I want rationality and I want civil discourse and civility, I go to NPR and I go to PBS. Am I biased? Am I seeing the world in a warped way?